Former Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, hello. Thank you so much.
It's a privilege to be here and be part of what is happening.
There's a rising criticism among the people of Australia, specifically the Jewish community, criticizing the government, criticizing Albanese for not doing enough to fight anti-Semitism. They're saying the writing was on the wall.
Well, I think those criticisms are fair. And post-October 7th, that has been occurring. There was a vacant space left where leadership was needed, and that created the opportunity for anti-Semitism to take hold. And in the 2 years following the attacks, we've seen a five-fold increase in the number of anti-Semitic incidents in Australia. Some of those extreme, as we saw in Bondi, but the firebombing of synagogues, the doxing of Jewish journalists and artists and academics and businesses and so on. It has been a very hard time to be a member of a Jewish community that for most of their time in Australia has known peace and prosperity and opportunity.
Some would say it's not enough, for Prime Minister Albanese to condemn what has happened now, because throughout this past year he was inflaming anti-Semitism. He was criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was declaring that he's recognizing a Palestinian state post-October 7th, with everything that Israel was struggling. He was banning ministers and members of parliament from entering the country. He was basically inflaming anti-Semitism.
All of the things you mentioned sort of fed into an environment in Australia where anti-Semitism was growing. Now, the government would probably argue that the issues of recognition of a Palestinian state and what has occurred with anti-Semitism are completely different things. But what I would say is, in an environment where anti-Semitism was gathering ground, was metastasising, where we saw increasingly violent speech in protests and many Australians turning out and marching alongside, them being peaceful, but marching along those sides preaching hate. And to in that environment, throw in the ending of 75 years of bipartisanship when it came to policy regarding Israel, in particular Palestinian statehood. Well, to not see how that might impact that environment, I think was disappointing, to say the least, and to put it diplomatically.
Yeah.
And even when you don't do something, that in itself is a problem, because it lets anti-Semitism take hold.
Yeah, in your favor, I have to say you were one of the first leaders to come to Israel after October 7th, to see with your own eyes the atrocities down south. You visited Be'eri. How do you feel when you see some world leaders not only recognizing a Palestinian state, but also condemning Israel when we're facing, 7 different fronts in the past 2 years?
I came to Israel straight after the attacks with my good friend Boris Johnson, and when we went to Kfar, the reason I wanted to come was to tell Australians that they weren't alone, that Australian leaders cared about them, understood what was happening and what they faced. I was frustrated that at the time there hadn't been enough outreach between the Prime Minister and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that connection. And I thought, well, someone has to go and tell Jewish Australians that we know what's going on here, and call it out and say that they weren't alone. And my dear friend Josh Frydenberg, the most senior Jewish politician ever in Australia, my treasurer, has shown a courage which has been just extraordinary. And he's led the charge and held the government to the account. But it hasn't just been Josh. There have been many others. So for Jewish Australians, you are not alone. You mightn't agree with the policies of the government. You may agree with the policies of the government. But
is that your message for the Jewish community? Do you see a brighter future? Is there a future for the Jews in Australia?
Absolutely. I'm very confident about that. And, I believe Australia will recover from this. I think we'll be true to who we are as a people. I think the response to the Jewish community following the attacks, I think, demonstrates that. I think there's been an eye-opening that, these views that have been expressed in Australia, globalising intifada, from the river to the sea, these type of sentiments aren't just academic statements. They're not just political jingles. They have serious meaning and serious consequences, and we saw those consequences visited upon 15 beautiful souls in Bondi.
Former Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.